Howdy folks, your favorite sketchy uncle who inexplicably can't be trusted around children is back once again to fill your head with Marxist nonsense. But first I must ask, have you spoken to a loved one about your feelings recently? It really is a must, especially if you're a man under 50. Because, as we all know, the sole reason why many men in this age bracket develop a sudden penchant for drastic life-abbreviating exploits is a lack of feelings talk. Yes, it definitely has nothing to do with the draining, monotonous tedium of being a wage slave, and slowly realizing that you're not one of the temporarily displaced millionaires who'll one day retire to a life of opulence. Or just retire at all, given the rate that the age of retirement keeps being pushed back. It's difficult not to be miserable when the majority of one's waking life is spent somewhere they'd rather not be, generating wealth for someone else, whilst being paid a sub-subsistence wage, strategically set at a rate to minimize social mobility. There's also the joy of destroying your health and shortening your life expectancy. It's always been strange to me that when people talk about habits that negatively impact the quality and duration of one's life, working long hours in a physically demanding job is seldom ever mentioned. It's always attributed to sedentary lifestyles, junk food, alcohol, etc. Never that maybe the reason many feel physically and mentally broken at 40 is that they've devoted 2 decades of their life to inflating their employer's bank balance, and due to mega inflation, they're now struggling to cover the cost of basic necessities like food and accommodation. Which feels extra special when you have a family depending on you to bring home the proverbial bacon. This issue has also been an underappreciated factor in the drop in birth rates and the decline of the nuclear family, which conservatives like to blame on women for being career-oriented. But what choice do they have? For a working-class family, a single income is seldom enough to support a childless couple, let alone additional children. If anything has led to the dwindling of the nuclear family, it's the insane cost of living driven by this era of kamikaze capitalism we're living through. But conservative types don't seem interested in talking about that. Their priority is to keep working people arguing over trivial shit like trans ideology and the ethnicity of Disney characters. So we're not having more productive conversations about issues like corporate greed, poor wages, and the hijacking of democracy. The liberal left are just as complicit in this do-si-do. Did anyone else living in Britain 20+ years ago notice that the rise of political correctness went hand in hand with a huge influx of migrant workers? It meant that anybody willing to acknowledge the practical implications of flooding an already struggling infrastructure with more people was labeled a racist or xenophobic. It was claimed that the migrants were brought in to work the jobs English people didn't want, which coincided with this stigmatization of the British working class as lazy benefit claimants, which was used by the incoming Conservative government of 2010 to justify implementing austerity to balance the books on the backs of the most vulnerable. But back to the migrant issue, immigrants have a threefold benefit to the ruling class. 1. To create a super-competitive labor market to suppress wages and working conditions. 2. As a scapegoat to distract the working class from the implications of their greed. 3. To endear right-wing populist political candidates who represent the interests of the ruling class to working folk. In the UK, we had 14 years of uninterrupted conservative governance, including 5 prime ministers who said they'd prioritise reducing net migration. We also had Brexit in 2020, which we were told would give the government greater powers to substantially reduce migrant numbers. The exact opposite happened. To make one thing clear, I have no issue with the migrants. They're working folk trying to do the best by themselves and their families like the rest of us. But the consequences of soaring immigration on local working class folk, in terms of access to work, housing, public services, etc., has been devastating. And to make matters worse, when an election cycle rolls round, the public has a limited choice between left-leaning political parties who claim to represent working folk but refuse to acknowledge the contribution of mass immigration on declining living standards, and right-leaning populist types who speak up about the problem of mass immigration but are ultimately self-serving chances, and only in politics to line their pockets and serve the whims of their big-money donors and the billionaire class. By the way, if you're still watching, you have my gratitude. But you might be wondering why I've decided to make such a contentious video on politics on a channel I've built up around the topic of fitness. If that's the case, you're missing the point. Politics is in everything. It's why many have a poor work-to-life balance, live with chronic stress, lean into their vices, eat their feelings and get fat. It's a contributing factor for why many lose hope and opt for self-deletion, aka the biggest killer of men in my age demographic. It's what makes it so difficult to drag my fat ass into the garage to train, as the physicality of my job already exceeds my ability to recover. Why I'm constantly carrying minor injuries and niggles from work that are often exacerbated by training. It feels like I'm permanently either at work or in a state of recovery from work, and lacking the necessary recuperative capacity to productively recover from arduous workouts. Hence why my last upload was 40 days ago, despite my expressed intention to increase my upload frequency a couple months back. And it's why I almost always feel physically broken, mentally wiped and emotionally demoralized. I look around my place of work, and the vast majority of people over 40 have abnormalities with their posture and gait. Issues like pronounced thoracic kyphosis, uneven shoulders, valgus knees, antalgic walking styles, grimacing during light manual handling tasks, etc. It's like a daunting look into the not-too-distant future. I work alongside ex-military chaps, like myself, university graduates with tens of thousands in student debt hanging over them, punished for the crime of being ambitious whilst not having wealthy parents that could afford to pay their tuition fees. I've also worked alongside skilled tradesmen, ex-business owners, ambitious entrepreneurial types, etc. My point is that these are not lazy or unambitious people, but their lack of success stories are congruent with the vast majority of people who have gone out on a limb to make something of themselves and often paid a heavy price for it. The problem is not that society is lacking in talented, hard-working people, it's lacking in opportunity.